Were you guys all watching the countdown and we just kind of held at 1 second? Yeah, boy. It's nice to have that sense of expectation. Well, welcome everyone to our time of worship. It's great to see you. Terry, it's nice to see you. How are you feeling okay? Doing good? It's good to have you here. Dorothy is here with us this morning. She told me that she has surgery scheduled a week from Monday, right? That hopefully will take away all her pain. I would love to have surgery like that. It's a great, the doctor is in the house. Look at that. Good. It's great to have everybody here. As vacations come and go the rest of the summer, we're going to have people coming in and out, and that's always to be expected, but it's wonderful to be together with God's people. A couple of things that I want to remind you of. If you are thinking about going to the steak and corn roast to benefit the Church of Christ Care Center, talk to Mel and Diane. The date is the 26th of August. They put on a great show, and so if you'd like to be part of a heritage table, that needs to happen here pretty quick. Or is it too late for that to happen? Okay. Which is 2 days. That's Tuesday, I think. So please, that's what that comes down to. Also, there is a card that we've been circulating it for a little while now, but it's out on the table in the lobby. It's a card for Tim Storm and his wife Clara. They had their baby shower last week, and I think Heritage has decided that we're going to try and buy a stroller for them. If you would like to, make sure you sign the card, but if you'd like to contribute to the gift, see Marilee or Chris, or is there anybody else? Or Melanie, if you'd like to help with that. And we'd like to get that taken care of as soon as possible as well. So talk to them today. It'd be nice to have that before the baby arrives, right? One more thing that I want to mention before we have our call to worship. We have had our communion sets on back order. A lot of people, I guess, are taking communion these days, and so those sets, we ordered 2 boxes of them a month ago, and they went on back order. I called the company on Monday and said we're going to run out this week, so they said, well, we'll ship them out today. You'll have them by Friday. Well, Friday came, and they weren't here. Saturday came, they weren't here. So this morning, I was scratching my head thinking, well, I'm not sure what we're going to do. But then I called Manu, who preaches for the Troy Church, and said, can you help us out? And so we are enjoying communion partly with the Troy Church this morning, and we thank them for that. So if you haven't yet got your communion sets, you might grab those now so that we can kind of go through that uninterrupted in a little bit. We are going to be called to worship this morning with the reading of Psalm 99. And as I shared last week and in Joyful in Hope, we're beginning a new sermon series today. We're focusing in the Gospel of Matthew. And we're going to talk about some questions. Questions that people had for Jesus throughout his ministry. And so I've entitled this sermon, What Did Jesus Mean by That? And hopefully, maybe you've got some questions for Jesus too, some things that you're trying to figure out. Hopefully in the next couple months, we'll find a biblical answer to some of those questions. But our reading this morning, our call to worship, Psalm 99, just solidifies for us what a great God we have. A God that can handle and will answer all of our questions. Let's enter into worship now. Mike?
Good morning. The Lord reigns. Let the nations tremble. He sits enthroned between the cherubim. Let the earth shake. Great is the Lord in Zion,
the world. Glory to the newborn King, Jesus, the light of the world. We'll walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy are bright. Shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world. Joyful all ye nations rise. Jesus, the light of the world. Join the triumph of the skies. Jesus, the light of the world. We'll walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy are bright. Shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world. Christ, my highest am adored. Jesus, the light of the world. Christ, the everlasting Lord. Jesus, the light of the world. We'll walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy are bright. Shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world. Hail the hand-born Prince of Peace. Jesus, the light of the world. Hail the Son of Righteousness. Jesus, the light of the world. We'll walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy are bright. Shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world. We'll walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy are bright. Shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world.
When I was a student at Oklahoma Christian about 100 years ago, a classmate of mine, Tim Howard, got hauled into the dean's office one day for wearing an offensive T-shirt around campus. His T-shirt said, "Question authority." But we all like to do that, don't we? We all have a little bit of a rebellious spirit based on the fact that we think that we are right. And if someone says something to the contrary to what we think or believe, then, and even if that person is someone in authority, we have come to believe that we have the right, even the responsibility, to question them. Oh, by the way, you may not be able to see it, but down below that initial message on Tim's shirt was, in much smaller print, the full quote with the author. It is the first responsibility of every citizen to question authority. Benjamin Franklin. As Christians, we may find ourselves at times even wrestling with God over some things. Now, we may not doubt that he exists, but we often wonder what in the world's going on. Wonder if he's right about things. You know, Jesus in his ministry got questioned a lot. And for the next several weeks, as I mentioned, we are going to use the Gospel of Mark and examine some of the things that Jesus said and did that caused the people around him, his foes, but also his friends and even his followers to question, to challenge, to second guess. Why did Jesus say that? Why did he do that? What did Jesus mean by that? And I'm hoping, again, that as we examine their questions and their concerns, that maybe we'll gain some insight and some help for our own questions. And we're going to begin today in Mark chapter 1. This is where Jesus begins his mission. And this possibly is the very first day of his public ministry. I've asked Sharon to read the text for us. She'll start with verse 1 and then read on from verse 21. Sharon?
The beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then, a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching, and with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. As soon as they left the synagogue, he went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was.
So Jesus goes into the synagogue, and people are amazed at his teaching, at the authority of his words. They'd never heard anything like this. And right in the middle of the service, as Sharon read for us, a man who is possessed by an evil spirit or a demon interrupts Jesus' teaching, and Jesus heals him, frees him of his demonic oppression. And so the people are amazed not just at his teaching, but now at his power as well. And so, again, in verse 28, news about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. And we're just getting started here. This is day one of Jesus' public ministry, just the first half of day one. In the afternoon, they're in the home of Simon and Andrew, and Jesus heals Simon's mother-in-law, and then it just keeps happening all day long and throughout the evening. People are bringing their sick daughters and sons, their grandpas and their aunts and their coworkers and their neighbors. They're bringing them to Jesus to be healed. And everybody is there. Mark tells us that the whole town of Capernaum had shown up outside of Simon's house. Can you imagine? I mean, it's day one, and Jesus has already gone viral. What a day. After a day like that, when Jesus has just been healing one person after another, and each time he feels God's power go out from him, Mark describes that a little later on in chapter 5. And he's preaching and he's ministering from sunup to well past sundown. I remember last year there was an episode in season 2 of The Chosen that we were watching that focuses on a day like that. Maybe you remember it. We never see Jesus in the entire episode until the very end, right? He has left the camp where the disciples are staying in the morning. And from the disciples' conversation, we know that he's out busy doing ministry, healing and teaching. And as evening presses in, they are sitting around a campfire and still know Jesus. And so they begin to share their own Jesus stories about their own encounters with the teacher. And then as they're talking, the tension starts to build over this ongoing conflict between Matthew and Peter. Peter believes that Matthew has betrayed his Jewish heritage by working for the enemy as a tax collector. And he sees the things that Matthew has been involved in as unforgivable. He stands up and makes that statement, I will never forgive him for this. And Peter's not alone. And very quickly, the tension, the conflict boils over as several of the disciples stand up with Peter to challenge, and they start to challenge one another, and it's almost like there's this contest of wills and of self-interest and of who's right and who's in charge here. And they're standing there looking at each other, and it's like who's gonna take the first swing? And then you hear these footsteps down the dusty path off in the distance, and eyes slowly turn and latch on to Jesus, who enters the picture, and he's just barely dragging himself, one foot in front of the other. There's a ring of sweat around the collar of his tunic, and he's obviously exhausted from this long, long day of ministry. And he does not pause. He walks right past him and says good night and heads to his tent to pray. What do you do after a day like that? How about you? Have you ever had one of those days? I mean, we've all put long days in, right? Where your normal 8-hour shift stretches to 12 hours because someone called in sick, and then suddenly it's 16 hours because there's just been a crisis, an emergency. Lucas, I'm so glad you're here. How many 24-hour days have you put in? A few, yeah. And it's brutal, right? What do you do after a day like that? Well, verse 35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went to a solitary place where he prayed. And Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." And Jesus replied, "Let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so that I can preach there also. That's why I've come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. So let's recap here for just a second. This is Jesus again, his first day of ministry. It's been a huge success, wouldn't you say? Powerful preaching, amazing miracles. The people are in awe, and the word is spreading like wildfire around the entire region. And if you're one of Jesus' first disciples, you're watching this and you're imagining all the possibilities, right? Feeling pretty good about leaving that stinky fishing boat. You wake up the next morning and Jesus is nowhere to be found. Maybe you don't panic at first, but then there's a knock on the door and Simon opens the door to his house and there's people already gathering, asking for the healer. And it's not just one or two people. People from around the region, as word spreads, start to show up at his doorstep with a blind brother, a father with heart failure, a demoniac daughter, a crippled cousin, and everybody is looking for Jesus, and everybody's asking questions. And now the disciples start to panic. And so they go looking for him. And the Greek that is used here literally says they hunted him down. And they find him. They give the report of what's going on back in town, and you've got to assume that Jesus is going to say, okay, well, we better get back there and get busy. And there's this tension that builds between Jesus and his disciples that you might miss at first, but let me clarify something about that word that's used and the sense of hunting him down. In Mark's gospel, the language of looking for someone is used several times. And each time it's used in a negative connotation. The one who is looking for someone else has the wrong motives in their search. And so Mark is cluing us in to something that's going on here. The disciples are coming to scold Jesus for not being where he should have been, for not doing what he should have been doing, for not taking care of the crowd. And so what's the tension here? Well, here we see at the very beginning of Jesus' mission, and really for anybody that has started something new, a startup company or a venture, the ones that last, there's a couple things that are clear right at the beginning. They're clear about who they are, and they're clear about what their priorities are. And so the question in Mark chapter 1 is this: who gets to decide Jesus' priorities? Who or what sets his agenda? What is the arc of his ministry going to be shaped by? And the tension, I believe, is between divine direction and crowd reaction. That's really what's happening here. Jesus has gone to a solitary place, seeking divine direction for his mission. Meanwhile, the disciples burst in on that scene with an update on the crowd, how they're reacting, how they're responding to what has happened. And I don't know exactly what's going on in their minds when they do this. No doubt the response of the crowd, the visions of just how big this ministry could go. Can you imagine if this thing really catches on? I mean, what all could we accomplish if things go in this direction? I mean, let's dream big. Let's fill the pews. Let's make a name for ourselves in the community, in the world. Let's build on this momentum. Fishers of men, heck, let's build a whole fleet. Again, I don't know for sure what they're thinking, but here's what I do know. A few days earlier, Jesus had called them and they had agreed to follow him, and now they're trying to tell him what to do. Does that sound familiar? You don't have to have been following Jesus for very long to suddenly find yourself saying, hey God, I think there might be a better way to do this. We look at the world around us, we look at what's happening in the community of Christ, and we see the way God is seemingly let things play out, and we say, God, would you just do something about this? let me suggest that there are two things that are true, and I want to say that these two things that are true can be true at the same time. The first one, I think you'll agree with. Life is better with Jesus. Truth number one. Everybody agree with that? All right, but here's truth number two. Jesus doesn't always do things my way. In fact, most of the time he doesn't, and he doesn't even give me a vote about it. Discipleship, following Jesus, means that we live in that tension, where we say with all our hearts, life is better with Jesus, and yet we ask, yeah, but why is he doing it that way? And if you ask that question, I want to suggest that you're in good company, because we go throughout the Gospel of Mark and the other Gospels, and several instances there are where Jesus' closest followers, his dearest friends, are the ones that are playing backseat quarterback with God. And for them, in Mark chapter 1, it's all based in the reaction of the crowd. I mean, you think about it. If it was only a few folks that had responded to what happened in the synagogue that morning, if the crowd that showed up at Peter's doorstep was just one or two people, if it had been sparse, then maybe the disciples would have been thinking, well, okay, let's move on. Let's greener pastures. But because the crowd reacts the way it does, the disciples are saying, man, we need to give them what they want. Hold their attention. Keep them interested. And as much as I'd like to separate myself from the crowd, from these guys who seem so easily swayed by the crowd, I've got to admit, and I think you will too, we are very susceptible to the influence of the crowd. How often do we look to others to help us decide our next move? I was in Costco a while back and shopping away, and an alarm went off throughout the entire store. Maybe you've been there when that happens. And when it happened, everyone, myself included, just stopped what we were doing and looked around to see what everybody else was doing. Nobody was sure, I don't think, that if it was a real emergency or if somebody had just gone out the wrong door, pushed a button somewhere. But for a moment, we all looked around to the crowd to determine our next move. I read something by a pastor and author, Mark Sayers, who writes this: we look to each other for opinion and reinforcement. He writes, today's society represents a shift from the vertical authority of God to the horizontal authority of the crowd. That in today's world, more than we want to admit, we care what everybody else thinks. Let's be honest. And I'll go first. There are shows that I've watched because I heard what the crowd says. I read Rotten Tomatoes. There are products that I have purchased because of how it was marketed to me and a few million other unique individuals just like me. There are things that I have reposted because they were trending with the crowd. And if we're not careful, eventually the crowd will influence how I see the world and what I value and what I think is important or who we think is worth caring about. Crowd's voice can get awfully loud, can't it? But here's the thing about crowds, and Jesus knew this. Crowds can change their mind pretty quickly. Crowds are fickle. During his ministry, Jesus got in front of crowds a lot. Here in Mark 1, the crowd is excited for Jesus, right? Other places in the Gospels, the crowd sits and listens intently for a while, but then they become skeptical. At one point, the crowd wants to force Jesus to become their political leader, and then later on, that same crowd is offended by what he says, and so they start to leave in droves. One day, the crowd is yelling, "Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And then 5 days later, they're screaming for blood. Jesus knew about the crowd. He knew that if we use the crowd as your consistent reference point, then you will lose all consistency, because the crowd is fickle. And so instead, Jesus leans into this constant voice that is unchanging. And so when the disciples come and say, "Everyone is looking for you," Jesus basically responds, "Listen, I've heard from the only one whose voice carries ultimate weight." The disciples come with all the pressure and anxiety of the crowd's response, and Jesus answers with the peace and assurance that comes from his Father's voice. And that really brings up the second way that the disciples wrestle with and maybe even second guess Jesus here. Because what we see Jesus doing when Simon Peter finds him, again, verse 35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went to a solitary place, and prayed. He prayed. The disciples blow right by that and jump to their agenda. And by their actions, they're saying, "Jesus, there's just more pressing, more practical, more important things than for you to be doing right now than to be praying." And again, I confess I've been right there with them before. So the question for us is, why did Jesus spend so much time in prayer? What did he mean by spending so much time in prayer? And that's what we're going to talk about next week. Let's stand and sing.
I will serve you because I love you. You have given life to me. I was nothing before you found me. You have given life to me. Heartaches, broken pieces, ruined lives are why you died on Calvary. Your touch is what I long for. You have given life to me. I will serve you because I love you. You have given life to me. I was nothing before you found me. You have given life to me. Heartaches, broken pieces, ruined lives are why you died on Calvary. Your touch is what I long for. You have given life to me. Heartaches, broken pieces, ruined lives are why you died on Calvary. Your touch is what I long for. You have given life to
Me. If you have your order of worship, and it'll be up here on the screen, our promise for the week actually comes from what we've been talking about for the last couple months, part of the Exodus story, part of God's deliverance of us from whatever faces us. Just to give a bit of background, the children of Israel have left Egypt, at least they're on their way out. They come up to the edge of the Red Sea, and they're in a panic again because Pharaoh's armies are pressing in on them. The Red Sea is in front of them. And here's what Moses says to them as they're in that panic, saying, "It would have been better for us to never have left." Moses answered the people in verse 13, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring to you this day. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again." And then our promise. Say this with me. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Let's be still and listen to God's voice this week. God bless.